Morning, everyone. I'm Prerak Bathia. I'm a partner at the Boston Consulting Group in our San Francisco office. I spend a lot of my time working with clients in the ag sector, really understanding their needs, their problems, and how we can deliver value to them. And I'm here with my colleague, Andy Lin, and Andy's a partner in our Chicago office. I'll let Andy talk about what he does.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Andy Lin from Chicago office, Boston Consulting Group. I lead our BCG's AI topic in manufacturing and supply chain. Have the pleasure to work with a lot of folks in the agribusiness industry, and then recently started touching the dairy industry too. So I appreciate the chance to be here and share some of the findings that we have in the past couple of years.
Fantastic. So the U.S. ag value chain is a $1 trillion market, right? And it's highly fragmented, going from growing input providers and equipment providers to growers and producers to folks who do trading and logistics, to processors, distribution of food, and then finally kind of the food service, last mile, including everything that comes to us. And it's an enormously fragmented market that's challenging to kind of understand where your place is and what you owe to someone downstream and what you're getting from someone upstream. And we're going to talk about it a little bit. So we really see 4 mega trends and tailwinds in ag that'll be solved with technology and software solutions. And we've grouped them kind of into 2, and I'm going to cover the first 2, which are around visibility across the value chain. So this includes traceability and regulatory scrutiny and ESG. So this is all about connecting the data, understanding where your food is coming from, figuring out what those complex regulations are that you need to meet and adhere to as you are a processor or as you're a member of this value chain. And then the second is really around network efficiency. So really, how do you get the most out of your assets, right? How do you leverage automation? How do you leverage optimization? How do you deal with labor shortages in the industry, which we've all seen over the last several years, and how you deal with that? So we're going to talk about those 2 things. So we'll start with the visibility across the value chain. What we've increasingly seen is with a lot of our clients that end consumers are willing to pay premiums for specific product attributes and traceability. And this goes across a number of the logos that you see here. And quite frankly, this has different complexity based on where you sit. The more commodity inputs that you have, and the further you are from the farm gate, the harder it is and the more you're willing to pay oftentimes for those traceability assets. On the flip side, if you're closer, you're often influencing what processors and producers are using from a technology perspective. So one of my favorite examples is Chipotle. And Chipotle pays a premium to all producers that can put data into a platform that tells them if their food is antibiotic-free, if they can give them information around animal and food lot IDs, if they can provide information around where something was raised. And all of that information is continuously being captured. And we're seeing on the other side of that a huge willingness to pay from consumers. And we think that this is just going to accelerate over the next few years. So let's talk a little bit about the value chain. It's complex. You've got ag services, you've got retailers, you've got producers, you've got animal production, and then you have a whole slew of purchasers going from aggregators to processors to distributors, finally to the end market of QSR, restaurants, so on and so forth. And what you have here is within this complexity, you have different needs, different software needs, different service needs, different solutions that each of the individuals need, and access to data for each of these. So, and what we've seen is each individual step embracing solutions that are helping them move the ball forward. But we haven't seen anything that kind of envelopes this, coalesces things, provides data across, and that's starting to become a huge need in the industry. Everybody says, I've got plenty of data, but do they have the right data when they need it and an easy way to capture it? We also find that data has different uses, value, and systems across the value chain. So we've kind of broken it into 3 different areas. So the first is around testing, inspection, certification. So quality control, inspections, certification, testing, lab, and those are kind of needed across your producers, your logistics players, your primary processors, your secondary processors, so on and so forth. The second really is driven by software, and this includes things like regulatory compliance, food safety risk, product attributes of any type of ingredient management, and ESG compliance. And then finally, it's leveraging that data into product orchestration, right? So, and Andy's going to talk a lot more about this, but how do you think about the data that you need to make sure that your systems are working well? And each of these pieces of data, like I said, have different values, right? So the value of capturing something from a product attribute, like I was describing with Chipotle, is actually really high. And it differs by end product, it differs by the supplier, and part of that is just distilling down what the value is to each of your components in your value chain. So this is just a sample of some of the data attributes or product attributes that you capture throughout the state, right? So producers, anything from animal IDs to quality assurance, to greenhouse gas emissions, to fertilizer and chemicals, to antibiotic use, to trading and logistics players who really need to understand batch lot number, inspection. They've got a bunch of things that they're monitoring in the warehouse, loading and ship times, to your primary processors who are looking at a lot of that same thing. They're looking at, when it comes to animal production, grading and certification, use sell-by dates, so on and so forth. And a lot of this data is still manually captured. And even chances where it's automated, it's not perfectly seen as to who in the value chain needs that data. So we think there's a real opportunity here. This is a little bit closer to dairy in terms of the different tools to help capture, ingest, analyze, and transmit this data. And we would say to all of those that are out here that participate in the value chain, if you're not beginning to use these tools, and if you're not using them on a day-to-day basis, you're missing out. And part of what we want to talk about is what some of those tools look like, how you can use them, and the importance to making you a much more efficient and better operation. So everything from monitor soil and cropping practices, you should hopefully be getting this from a traceability perspective on a very regular basis. Grain origination and hauling, having some of this data to understand where your grain is coming from, your biggest input into your farm. Feed mill and nutritionist software, again, this is critically important to understand what your livestock is, what they're consuming, what that looks like, how you improve their health. And then in the operations, making sure that you efficiently convert feed into milk. Tracking animal behavior and welfare, making sure that you get the most out of your assets. So where does that leave us with traceability? So really, we think there's kind of 3 things that need to happen. The first is an automation of data collection, right? And so how do you increase the efficiency of the supply chain by removing some of the manual processes that happen today? The second is a strong integration with your current systems, and not only looking at your current systems, but what's being used downstream, because that's the most important piece of this. As I said, what you've got is end consumers willing to pay, so making sure there's an adherence to what they're looking for and providing that in a timely manner. And then finally, some data standardization. This is still in the works. We think this is still evolving in the industry of, sure, the regulatory, from a regulatory perspective, that data has been standardized, but as we think about ESG and carbon, as we think about product attributes that are continuing to evolve, what are the right data standards? And that's part of what I think organizations like IDFA can help with as well. So that's a little bit about traceability. Look forward to a discussion with you all after this on it. I'm going to turn it over to Andy to talk a little bit about manufacturing and getting the most out of your assets.
Thanks, Prerak. Let's go this one. Perfect. Maybe let me start with a quick survey of questions for everyone here. When we talk about production systems, have a lot of different elements. Maybe raise your hand if you're done some work with lean production system, Six Sigma, or like production efficiency improvement in your operations. Great, a lot of you. Raise your hand if you've done a good amount of work in digitizing the processes, making things paperless, start to put interfaces into your production systems. Awesome. And raise your hand if you feel that you're getting more comfortable and start integrating artificial intelligence algorithms to help you in your production system. Stefan, we talked last night. Great, great, great. And I think today our sharing about production systems and networks or supply chain, I will position them more like a thought starter or a set of questions or teasers rather than answers. So don't expect very clear answers from us. We're still trying our hands, but we want to share some mental models and thinking process we have. Start with within the four walls. How we work our clients in the past couple of years started to trigger our thinking around 3 different steps we've seen in this journey. The first step is we call lean operation systems or traditional industrial engineering in this process, where you start to standardize different procedures, making sure the functions in the plants are getting clear, and then they collaborate smoothly. And you start to set standard processes and train your leaders in a way that they can run the plant in an analog way well. We've seen increasingly become a table stake is people start to digitizing. Once they finish or once they get a good amount of progress in standardizing their processes, that's where you see MES, historians, SCADA systems, and also like some sort of a user interface across different functions start to come together, and people will have a standard repository of data, and they can gradually use that to make some decisions. What we're seeing that more and more of our clients in both dairy and other food processing industries start trying their hand is what we call AI-enabled smart factories. And it goes hand in hand with the previous 2. If you don't have the previous 2, it's extremely hard to go to the third step. But if you have a good foundation of the previous 2, you start to see tremendous value. This is where you selectively find the places where you have the biggest value loss and starting putting in targeted automations, targeted decision supports in the hand of your peoples on the shop floor, and enable them to make smart decisions. The reason we're talking about this is we've seen a lot of your peers and also a lot of people you can benchmark in similar industries getting some value out of it. And by value, we divide into a couple of different categories. First, there are traditional efficiency saving levers that you're implementing already across quality, yield, scrap rate, and also throughput. The deployment of digital and AI can potentially drive additional benefits on top of that and potentially sustain it longer. We typically see 5 to 10% more on your traditional saving levers. But beyond that, we've also seen successful deployments started driving the enhancement of standardization approach to lean. That allows you to reduce the unnecessary amount of work, make your people focus on the right things, and that start to have a tremendous impact on the behaviors of your people in the plant, and then their focus on the right problem to solve. On top of that, when people start to focus on the right things, they feel like they're empowered by technology. There's less turnover, which is a big problem we've seen with most of our clients in the past couple of years. And finally, with all of the previous 3, you will start to see some improvements trickling down to your service levels, to your customers. And it comes together nicely as a good production system improvements within the 4 walls. Not to mention all the soft benefits on more sustainable operations, improved safety outcomes, and higher people engagement, and a better customer experience. So that's why we believe it's important to talk about it, and that's why we believe it's important to share some of the things we're seeing as working and then driving some impacts in the space. And you might have a question of like, what are the different bits and pieces we've seen that's working? The way we try to organize things together onto this one page for you guys is there are a lot of bits and pieces in this industry. The bits and pieces are interesting because they fall into different pillars of a production system. So under the connection to the supply chains, there are bits of piece things you can do on control emissions, monitor that, and then optimize your networks. We're going to talk a little bit more later when we go to the supply chain. Under the production planning, there are many interesting things to do on how to plan the right things to make based on the raw material, the labor, the situations when you wake up to your plant for the day. Because historically, people have to come to the shop floor and then figure things out. But with data, with the enablement algorithm, you help your people plan better. Well, you go into the production, there are a set of things that we see more and more successful players doing. Optimizing your set points, making sure you get the right yield and throughput out of your equipment during the day. Deploy your labor correctly into different locations and coordinating between different line leads. Early warning system, on different equipments and different parts of our production systems are potentially getting issues during the production. And also, very importantly, selectively deployed automations into different processes when you have labor weak points and ping points. And finally, there are way more you can do on the production support, which is checking the quality, automating that process, making it more accurate. But I think, the one thing that we've typically seen people missing is it's not about the bits and pieces that's important. It's your whole system that's important. You got way more value when you deploy this as a system versus when you go pick bits and pieces and put in the hands of your people. Because quickly you see people are saying, oh, you put 10 different applications on the hands of my line leads or supervisors. They get overwhelmed very quickly. That's why we want to put into one organized page for you. But we remind you it's not purely about bits and pieces, it's about the whole system. And a potential vision of how the whole system comes together is this a little bit overused concept of digital twin. By digital twin, how we define is when you have relatively accurate and also organized way to abstract your production system and track the data within it, you have visibility first, at different processes and different stages of your production. You track the raw material coming in. You can click into each of your procedures and then see how it is doing, but more importantly, how it might be doing in the next hours, days, and weeks. Immediate visibility about key procedures, where the bottleneck is, how it is performing, but how it will perform in the next hours, weeks, and days. And then more importantly, you have your team members looking at each individual sections of the production and have supportive analytics and user interface in their hands to help them make decisions. And what you're seeing here is a potential, we call it digital twin simulation run before the production of the day, before the production of the week, where people see in a simulation how things will play out for the next days and hours. And typically, what we're seeing a successful client will do is they come back with their team. They don't leave everything in the hands of the technology or AI, but they come back with their team and say, how can we do better? And that question actually is the key driver of efficiencies in your four walls and production system. How can we do better? What can we change? And what if we do this? And the main benefits we've seen on a system like this is to give people good suggestions, transparency, but allows them to quickly test their thoughts and concepts in the cheap details. So that's within the four walls. Moving beyond the four walls, on the supply chain side, the theme that we've seen is about data integration with upstream and downstreams to mitigate fluctuations that are coming from upstreams and downstreams. That goes much more broader than within the four walls, but the key thinking here is, what if your raw material supply get disruptions, and how would you typically react today? What are the data that will help you react better and in a more prepared way tomorrow? Same thing for the downstream. How do you track the fluctuations from your customer side today? And do you have enough visibility? And how does it help you if you have additional data in the system to track it tomorrow? to help you be better planned for that. And when it comes together, it's pretty powerful that you're more prepared. Again, like why we're talking about this. We're talking about this because you can uncover revenue upside, you can uncover EBITDA increase, because you can better anticipate those fluctuations coming to you from up and downstreams. Your service level goes up because you're more prepared. Your supply chain cost typically goes down, especially on your procurement and inbound, outbound logistic planning side. And finally, it should have an impact on your working capital and our sustainability of your whole operations of your supply chain. That's the reason we think it's important to talk about these solutions and what are people doing here. Same way of organizing things for you, like we organize things for you in the four walls. We want to organize the bits and pieces for you into a framework or into a mental model outside of the four walls. We've seen interesting things around, again, taking the digital twin within the four walls, but abstract to a digital twin of your whole network, allows you to then simulate different scenarios. It's kind of even more important for the supply chain, given all the disruptions you're having today, to simulate different scenarios and have a visibility about where is the pinch point of your supply chain. We've seen increasingly amount of people using control towers to monitor the performance of their facilities, but also monitor the performance upstream and downstreams. Pair with end-to-end planning, where before the planning is typically within your own operations, but going forward, the planning will be integration with your customers, integration with the raw material providers. In dairy industry, we believe it's even more important because the input is perishable, it continues to come. Stefan told me that he has little or less control than other industries because it's all about like when people decide to send in the milk, and then you need to have a lot of more preparation and more ways to divert and then rearrange supplies when it comes. We've seen network design being important given the change of landscapes and raw materials. And finally, we've seen increasing amount of applications in both risk management. Everybody's talking about supply chain disruption these days, but how can we put in mechanism guardrails to guide the action towards the risks? And finally, increase the amount of emission management and sustainability management, both reporting to get benefits from the regulation and also from the end customers. Again, I want to emphasize again, the bits and pieces are good. They're a good starting point. But to deploy and get full value out of things, it's all about thinking in a system way. Well, the previous couple of pages will make you think, oh, OK, so tools already exist. People are using that. So everyone should be happy. We should see a lot of revolution going on in this industry. Surprisingly, when we survey about 1,500 different manufacturing executives, 98% of them give us more complaints than cheers of success. And they're saying, like, it's really hard to scaling AI through the production network. And we asked them why. Give us some reasons. We saw two main themes coming up that people say, if you solve this for me, maybe my life will be better, and maybe I'll see more success. The first theme is around people and organizations. For those of you who went down your way of deploying digital systems and also artificial intelligence solutions in your plant, maybe let's do another quick survey. How many of you seeing any challenges on people and organization handling new type of talents, and how do you sustain a new type of team within your industry? Raise your hand if you're concerned or thinking about that day by day. Yeah. The 1,500 of other executives think about the same way. They think about the lack of digital skills and capabilities. They think about how can we get a clear strategy around AI and also governance. They think about sometimes legal compliance and also the risks around that, and the governance at the end. Well, the other side of the story is there is a huge revolution and investment in the technology infrastructure. When we talk about deploying these systems, we talk about connecting the bits and pieces together and using an infrastructure to make them run. And what we hear back from those executives is typically, we're lacking of data processing. Like data are a little bit messy. We need to wrangle them together, and we are lacking that capability. Typically, we're lacking visualization of infrastructures. We're lacking connectivity in some area. How do we talk with the leadership of the company to drive decisions in a strategic way, to not say, oh, just deploy that piece, but say, what's the 5 or 10 years vision of the infrastructure to support us to become an AI leading company in dairy? Is a very interesting question for us to think about. I will leave you with 2 questions or teasers coming out from there. I said at the beginning, like, we come here to share more questions than answers. Hope you don't mind. One is, the bits and pieces exist. Even the infrastructure come in bits and pieces to you, I guess. SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, different MES. There's tremendous capability and needs to piece them together, and we actually didn't see many clients having that capability today, and everybody is struggling, and hopefully you don't feel alone. But the price at the end of piecing them together and deploy it successfully and enabling your team is huge. So what's your plan of putting the talent together or putting a team together behind that? That's my first teaser or question to leave you to think about after today. The second is something that me and my colleague always debate with a client, and then we always need to come in and kind of turn around their mindset a little bit at all of these efforts. Typically, when people hire consultants to come in and talk about technology and solutions, they thought we're going to come in and deploy technologies or build a piece of technologies. But at the end of the day, we tell them it's actually 10% about technology, maybe 20% about algorithms and data that come together, but it's 70% about people and process. And if you don't turn your mind around that way, if you don't have a production system behind the production applications, if you don't have a supply chain best practice behind the supply chain systems, we typically see things fall very fast. And we'll leave you with like 3 or 4 questions, how to build a top-level alignment and commitment on the value of AI. Where do you target? What's your strategy? What's your roadmap? How do I source, attract, develop, retain AI talents? Some of my food processing and dairy customers come to me and say, look, our last generation of talents, they come to us, they work with us for decades, they retire here. But when we hire new AI talents or data scientists, they come here, they work here for 3 years, they jump to Google, they come back somewhere. It's very hard to think about like the new talent lifecycle in this industry if we want to be successful in AI. So how do you think about that? And the third question is, how do I boost adoption at scale and transform my related functions? Because people also need to learn doing things different ways when they implement different technologies. When you try to implement solutions in your 4 walls and supply chains, there are a lot of work to drive change within your organization, to persuade people or to talk with people how to do things differently. And finally, how do I review my operating model to optimally articulate human and AI together? It's never about the AI or the solutions. It's about how it empowers your team, your organization. And the initial question is, how do we mitigate all of the labor fluctuations during this journey of deploying AI? But in the middle of that, we took a step back and think about how we really frame that question of AI and labor together, because there's increasing amount of intersection we're seeing between the solutions we put in on the shop floor and the labor who's using that, the automation we put on the shop floor, and the laborers who is being repurposed because now you have automation in place. And I think the reframing of the question we come up with is, what type of environment of production and supply chain do we want to create and provide to our employees? And how does AI empower them? And that was one of the change moment where we say, okay, it's not about automation replacing labor. It's about how we enable people to move from more dangerous works, more tedious works, to focus on things they want to focus on. It's about empowerment of our frontline workers and making sure that they feel that their career in a better place after we deploy them AI. And there are line leads who are being empowered during that process. We put in the hand of the algorithms. They have a lot of worries at the beginning to say, oh, you're distilling all of my insights of how to run the line. Would I be useless after deploying AI? And then, will we all go away? At the end of the day, what we figure out is it's not about, again, replacing your mind. It's about helping you better distill your insights, but passing along to different part of the organization. And then you can go to another level when you design, your operating models. So it might be a long-winded answer of definition of responsible AI, but it's more about how you think about empowering your organizations, and then how you think about better collaboration with the customers and downstream of the supply chain. That was my long-winded answer. Anything to add, Prerak?
No, I agree. I think part of it is a level of trust, right? Trust that this isn't something that's going to replace you, and trust that it's going to be a useful tool. And I think before you have that, or without that, you're not going to get the most out of it.
Yeah. The second question we see here is, you mentioned digital twin. Are you seeing digital twin being used for security and cyber purpose to minimize risk shutdown? We do see, so it's not directly related with security and cyber. My honest answer is security and cyber is always, again, a topic when we come to the transformation of the operation process, and as well as the supply chain. We spend a lot of efforts to design the interface, as well as to design the connections back into the production system, to making sure no one can accidentally stop a line, or no external organization can easily access the control of the production system. That's kind of table stake. And beyond that, there's a lot of information sharing, also sensitivity of up and downstream information sharing. How do you make sure that happens in a safe way? That's always a topic when we deploy those solutions. On the digital twin side, we did use that to do a lot of simulation of scenarios. It's more about supply chain risk management. When you have different scenarios of inputs and outputs coming to you, how does that look like within your four walls and up and downstreams? That's the simulation we do. Not a typical cyber and security risk, it's more supply chain risk. And shutdowns, for sure, when you see the bottleneck performing not well in the simulation, then you quickly take actions to mitigate. So I think the digital twin usage might not be directly related with security and cyber, but I do want to emphasize that security and cyber is always front and center in those type of deployment of solutions.
Yeah, I'd say generally with security and cyber, right, part of what you build in a digital twin model is based on a ton of data that you have around your operations and being able to simulate what happened, doing what-if scenarios. We typically think of security and cyber as external threats, so they're much harder to model into something. So it's not an area where we've seen it a lot. Okay. Do you have any other questions from the?
If you have questions from the audience, we also have a microphone, so if there's any other questions. All right. Well, we're still here for. Oh, there's one more. Okay. How do you address the issue of data quality with your customers? Okay. It might be related with the traceability. I actually have a lot of wrestling with data qualities, but I'll let you, maybe Prerak, you answer first.
Sure. So how would you describe, looks like the question just went away. So something around, I think, how do you address data quality? Yeah, so I think there's a number of different ways you could do this, especially along the traceability. So a big part of it is measuring data quality as you go across. So I think in the production system, it's very different in terms of what you're capturing, what are the sensors being used, and then where you house that. Along the traceability, along the value chain, has to be a lot of trust from downstream and upstream, right? And so we see this in the form of certainly food audits, and I'm sure you guys are very familiar with that. We see this in the form of reviewing this with your upstream and downstream, pretty frequently. Of this is what we saw, this is what we got. Certainly, I've seen this as we've worked with processors around grading and making sure that sampling and auditing is extremely relevant and important. It really does depend on the type of data that you're capturing, right? So if it's data around production system, it's typically anchored in in automated processing. If it's more manual, of course you need to be auditing and sampling that much more frequently. So I think it depends on the type of data, and then setting up the guardrails both upstream and downstream in your value chain to make sure that you're reviewing those regularly.
Yeah, okay. I'll pick the next question, which is related with data. How would you describe the volume of data necessary for AI to provide meaningful decision making? That is a great question. It's spot on, which a lot of the solutions you've seen, the bits and pieces, for example, when we talk about predictive maintenance, the typical question is, my equipment only break down 5 times, like significantly per year or something like that. And you only get trained 5 times to look at the failures. How do you really train your algorithm effectively? I have 2 sides of the answers to that question, all from like the battle-tested struggles with this same question when we implement that. One side of the answer is, that's why you start with the production system and the digitization, not directly go to AI, because that offers the foundation for you to get the value out of the system before you even deploy the AI. And when you have the teams operating effectively, doing preventative maintenance, doing observations of the equipment and lines, that's the foundation before the AI comes into play and say we can predict things. That's one side of the answer. The other side of the answer is more futuristic. When we typically train algorithms and AIs, there are different ways to augment the reality on how you get enough Y variables to train the AI, that including synthetic data generation. A lot of you might have heard ChatGPT generative AI. There is increasing amount of application of how do you take the historical failures, but then using AI to generate synthetic failures to feed into your AI, and then train them at a day one of the production so that it can quickly ramp up and do it. So 2 sides of the answer. One side is very practical. You shouldn't thinking too much about AI before you've fully done the production system and digitization and your basic foundational things. That should give you 80% of the value, but the 20% will be unlocked when you train the AI. The second part is more futuristic, which you can actually accelerate the training of AI with some of the cutting edge technologies. That was for that question. The next question is from Moses. What is your advice on the AI entry point for processors with aged equipment? We also wrestle with that a lot, because typically we've seen equipment of a year of like 5 to 10 years in the plants. Some of them have different protocols of PLCs, and some of them doesn't have connection to the SCADA system and others. There are different tools available today on the market to help you quickly connect analog systems and then get it back the data into the SCADA system. And again, my comment on that is there are 2 sides. One is your people on the shop floor is a great input source, and then that's a little bit agnostic to the equipment itself. If you do your checks and clean, lubricate, and inspection correctly every day, you have a rich data source coming back from your people on the shop floor. Empower them for that and utilize that. The second part of the data source is there are technology can quickly help you hack into each of these old PLCs or stuff. We have old tanks, old compressors in this production lines where we quickly retrofit sensors that do the tank level, do the temperature, do different other measurements. And there are tools like IO-Link and other different IOs connect back to your PLC and back hack to your SCADA system historians that allow you to do things quickly. We've seen people shorten the time from 6 months of retrofit of equipment to about a couple of weeks, as long as you choose the right technology and hire the right partner to do that. So yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, I'd say that the good news is that your ability to retrofit and the number of kind of IoT sensors that are out there that can measure what you want off an asset exists and kind of permeates most of the industry now. So a lot of it depends on kind of what you're looking to measure coming off of that asset. So, but we've seen a lot of solutions out there that work on pretty old pieces of equipment. So
yeah,
we'll take the next question. So if a company or producer is starting on this journey, what's the best place to start to build the capability? So this is from John Church. It's a good question. We often we'll start with the strategy, right? What is it that you are trying to achieve as a business? What's most important from a competitive perspective for you to get right? What's the end goal, right? And then starting through, the way we think about it typically is, what are the advantages you have? What are the assets that you have? What are the capabilities that you have today? Why do you have a competitive advantage? And then, how do you strengthen that, right? What are the things that you can do? So we've worked with lots of our clients, and that's typically the starting point of it. It starts with the strategy, and it doesn't need to be a huge, laborious session where you really try to nail what that is. That could be just a few weeks. But I think without starting from that standpoint of what am I trying to achieve, what else is happening in the market, and where, how does this kind of how does this map to where I want to be in 5 years? Without that, I think you're typically just dead in the water because you don't have a clear vision of where you're trying to go. So that's typically where we start. And then it's really, the second piece of it is really a capability assessment, looking yourself in the mirror, looking at your organization in the mirror and saying, what do we really have and what do we not have? And it's not about, oh, we implemented a new system 2 years ago, so we've got all of this data, and are you using it? Are you actually getting the insights? Do you have clear KPIs that you are measured towards? Is everybody on the same page within the company? So that's typically where we start.
Yeah, and I'll add to that is it boils down to this 3 simple letters, ROI, right? Yeah. So you have to have the R to get your board members and CEO engaged to say that, how firmly do I believe in the R? And finding the R is, as Prerak mentioned, it's typically the first step. Because we saw a lot of people start without the R, and then they jump in and start with the T, which is technology, and then quickly got overwhelmed because the T is not producing the R. So the most important thing is start with the R, and then you go to the I, which is the investment, and then say, I justify myself for that. And after you do the ROI, the most important thing is actually be very honest and track yourself. Again, that's what we've seen that people is not doing too well, or doing in a very losing manner where we typically came in and then, add value, and I hate to be perceived in always pushing the client to that, but it's actually necessary to say, okay, we talk about ROI. Are we getting it or not? Are we getting it in 6 months or a year or 2? Can we be honest with ourselves? And for sure, the plan always changes, but if you don't start with ROI and then keep tracking it, then you quickly lose your whole plan. And that's not, we think, is the best way to invest in technology. So that's that. Sorry, we had a final question. Can you talk about building culture between AI, automation, and your labor team, making sure there's comfortability and not fear of replacement? That was a $1 million question. And I don't know who asked it. It's not anonymous, but thank you for asking that question. We think every day and pretty deeply about that question, I will say. And I think it's the question to figure out when we talk about technology. Because if you don't solve that question, you don't have the acceptance from your team and your production system of the new things you're putting in there. And I would just offer a couple of mental models we think about this. The one mental model we think about this is a human-centered design. We believe when you talk about AI today, it should still be centered around humans. And not many people gets that, because many of deployment we see is centered around technology. We want fancy technology, we want fast technology, we want a strong computation power. But the typical missing piece is human-centered design. How do you empower your human in the day-to-day processes? What's your map of your people on your shop floor, different personas? How do they go through their day by day? And what's in it for them when you deploy AI? That's a $1 million question for everyone of us to solve. Before you solve that, don't deploy any single piece of AI onto your production system, because people are going to reject that. Your body going to reject the organ, and you're going to die very quickly. So that's the first mental model, which is human-centered design, and then it also fit back to your production system. The second mental model is change management. If you deploy AI without a change management program, typically it's going to fail, because there are new things you need to educate your team. What is that? Why are you putting this piece of thing into my daily life? And also, what's the vision of the company for that? Because we've seen when we go to the shop floor with our clients, people are actually care about what the company is thinking, how the company is thinking about this. They don't purely care about what's the piece coming my way. They're like, why are they doing that? What are they thinking about? And how would I change my life in 2 to 5 years? There's a lot of top-down and bottom-up communication that's necessary to bring the whole organization along. And without that, again, your people will be rejecting AI, and likely you're not going to see the ROIs and success in this journey.
Yeah, I'd also say it's early innings on this, right? Around how you do this well. We think it'll follow a pretty similar path to basically deploying different technology. AI is a little bit different and a different beast, and so, but still very early innings on this. But I think absolutely to Andy's point, there's got to be some piece around change management and how this aligns with the broader company goals. And there has to be something around centering it around your team. How is this going to help your team move faster, be more agile, get a better return, move your process faster, so on and so forth. So I think those are two pretty critical points.
And maybe last, we could maybe tell you a quick story if you still have time about deploying that. It's exactly matched the question. I think every time we first went into a plant or went into a supply chain system, the typical comments we heard is, your AI is stupid. We know the system better because we've been working on that day by day for 10 years. You're missing here and there, like 10 different points that making this thing less useful. And I think the collaborative way that we need to structure with our people in the system is, first show them, hey, this thing is going to take the paperwork out of your day-to-day. It's going to focus on the things you want to focus on. It's going to make your life potentially easier. Can we collaborate and then distill the insights from your 10 years, 2 decades of work, how to make it better? And that's actually how we started this conversation with this 2,000 people plant with each of the line leads and the supervisors, and talk about how can we make their day better, because their day is chaotic. You're missing 500 people every day, and you don't know where the people are missing, and you don't have transparency. What we start talking about is the transparency will make life better because it helps you collaborate across different line leads and move people around in a collaborative way. And once you see a bits and pieces of buy-in, people start to be curious and then say, okay, cool, this actually can make my life a little bit better. Let me sit down with these people and then start collaborate with them. And gradually, they get on the board. And now 2 years later, that's the tool, that ritual they go through every day. So I think that's a story I'll leave you with, and think about. It's really, the question is great. It's really about how do you building the culture between AI automation and the labor team. So keep asking yourself the same question as you go on the journey.
Well, thank you guys. Pleasure spending some time with you. Look forward.
Thank you very much.